Homework Hotline, what is your emergency?
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the Homework Hotline. Nate and I are here to help you with your homework.
Yeah, as you can see, it's just Sam and I today. Becca can't be here, unfortunately, but you can still get help with me for math, and you can get some science help from Sam over here. Again, we are here live every Tuesday and Wednesday from 4:30 to 5:30 p.m.
So if you call us, we'll interact with you and walk you through your problem. Calling is really the best way for us to help you with your problem, get your question answered. So our number's on the screen here, 720-424-1666. And our show is sponsored by our high schools. I teach at the Contemporary Learning Academy, and Nate teaches over at Emily Griffith High School.
Yeah, and we have a few ways you can watch us live. That's on Comcast Channel 22, Prism TV Channel 8007, Facebook Live at EG Homework, or live stream at livestream.com. Just search for DPS TV. And if you'd like to see some of our previous shows or answers to specific questions, you can find us on Facebook, at YouTube Live at Denver DPS TV.
And we have a guest on the show today. We have Mike Kane from ABC Composting, and I have to admit, I am genuinely excited about this topic because composting interests me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited about it too. I mean, it's no skiing, but I can certainly warm up to the idea.
Oh, look at you with the fun. You know, we can probably get a ski instructor in here or something like that.
Yeah, we might be able to.
Something like that? I feel like we should be able to do something along those lines.
Yeah. And remember, we do prefer to get your phone calls, but we know calling isn't always the easiest thing for you to do, so we do have somebody monitoring our social media. Caitlin, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're going to be doing here?
Hi guys, I'm Caitlin. I'm an intern at DPS TV. Just like Nate said, I will take in all your questions over social media. Every show, I will ask a trivia question at the top of the show. And if you guys know the answer to the trivia question, go ahead and call on in with our number. And you guys will win a prize if you get it correct. Today's trivia question is a history question. It is, during the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897, what were so highly valued for their vitamin C that miners traded gold for it? So if you guys know the answer, go ahead and call on in.
Oh, what could it be?
Guess we'll find out.
All right, well.
Oh, I guess we should,
jump over to
Becca
Caitlin for the social media for a
says
question.
that part, so. Forgot about that.
Perfect. All right. So our first question for today is, what is the volume of a cylinder with a circle radius of 8 and the length of 14? So this is a math question.
Oh yeah, I can take that. Now I'm a little distracted. Okay, so we're really thrown off now that Becca's not here, apparently.
Yeah, Becca does certain things that are just required by the show.
Right,
Nate and I just sit here and let them do it.
We're just kind of staring at each other like, wait, who's going to say this? All right. Anyways, volume of a cylinder. So I'm going to kind of sketch what that would look like. So it's got a radius of 8 and a length of 14. So I'm not going to draw a very good cylinder, but it is a cylinder-ish looking thing if you look at my screen. Yeah, so that's a pretty bad cylinder, but the cylinder. So when you think about cylinder, think about like a can shape, like a soda can. And when you have, when you look at your soda can, it might say like 12 fluid ounces. It's kind of talking about the volume there. So this has a radius of 8 and a height of a length of 14. We actually think of length and height kind of in the same way. But I'm just going to label this really quick. And sorry, Caitlin, did it say centimeters or? Oh, just a length. So we'll just call it units. So here's what to think about. I always give this very general equation for volume. So volume is area of the base times the height of the object. So I'm going to put over here B is area of base, and H is height of object. And the reason why I try to keep this really generic is, honestly, you have a lot of formulas you have to memorize in math and just a lot of different procedures. What we can do is kind of combine those, so when you're looking at volume formulas, you don't have to also think about all these volume formulas. If you knew all the formulas for areas of different shapes, then you can just remember this and apply this volume formula. So when we look at this, I kind of want you to imagine when we talk about volume, it has a base that's a circular shape. And if you can kind of imagine that this circular shape is stacked on itself over and over and over and over again, that's where you kind of have that height of the object. So what we actually do is we find the area of the base first. So in this case, my area of the base is going to equal the area of a circle. So I'm going to write base equals pi r squared. Right? So again, that's just thinking about that two-dimensional shape that makes up this entire figure. So all we're going to do is I'm going to actually rewrite this equation, volume equals, and where I have this area of the base variable, I'm going to plug in this, which is pi r squared. So I'm literally just substituting this in here. Pi r squared, and then height. So again, Caitlin, when she asked the question, mentioned length, but you know, you could call it length if it was laying on its side and call it height if it's standing upright. It doesn't really matter that much. But when we talk about the height, we're talking about the height of the entire object. So the height of the object is 14. I'm going to leave this here for a second, though, because I think it's always a good idea to write out the equation before you start plugging numbers in so you don't forget any part or mix anything up. So now we're literally just plugging things in that we know. So we're looking for the volume. It equals pi. Now instead of r here, we know the radius is 8, so we're going to plug in 8 squared, and then the height is 14. So you can kind of see if I set up the equation first and I take that extra 15 seconds or so to figure out what the appropriate equation is, then the plugging it in seems a little bit more straightforward than trying to do everything at once. And I'm literally just going to plug this all in my calculator. So what I'm going to do is 8 squared times 14. Oh, 1 second. 8 squared times 14 is 896. And I'm still left with this pi. So this, I want to kind of leave you with two options. If your teacher asks you to solve in terms of pi, this is the most precise way to do it. Just leaving it as 896 pi. But if you were solving an application problem, just imagine you were talking to somebody and they said, how much soda can you fit in that can? And if you said 896 pi fluid ounces or something like that, it wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So in that case, you would want to go ahead and do this simplification in your calculator, which is going to be rounded to 896 times pi. We're going to round to 2,814 point, and we'll call it 87. So it was 867, and I'm just rounding it to 87. You just have to think about like what you're being asked. Sometimes when you're rounding, you think about the context. If I was talking about money, I would round to something like this, 2 decimal places because of cents. So sometimes it's very obvious what you should round to. Other times, maybe the problem says round to the nearest tenth or round to the nearest hundredth. So just keep that in mind. So hopefully that helps.
All right, great. And before we get to another homework question, I just need to give you our contact information. Again, something that Becca is so good at getting us to do, but Nate and I apparently not as good. So yeah, there you go. Those are the different ways to contact us through social media, texting, Twitter, Facebook,
Or email.
Or email. There's the one that I was missing. Thank you. All right, so let's jump over for you got a science question for me, Caitlin?
I do. Our next question is, what is the main means by which autotrophic organisms obtain energy?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I'm actually teaching some of this in my class right now. And as I usually like to do, I guess I'd sort of like to talk a little bit about what the question is really asking, think about some of the words. So the word that's probably going to trip people up in there is autotroph or autotrophic. And we can kind of break that down. Trophic is maybe not a piece of a word we hear very often, but auto refers to self. Auto means self. We tend to think of it as automatic, right? We hear that word, and what that essentially means is a machine that works by itself. But in the case of an autotroph, what we're talking about, the troph part of that word refers to feeding. And so the notion is that autotrophs, the name implies that they're able to feed themselves essentially automatically. They don't have to go out looking for food. So we humans, maybe the way I describe that, it sounds like a human. Of course I can feed myself. I can go to King Soopers and get food and sustain myself here in this modern world. But that doesn't make me an autotroph. I'm a heterotroph because I have to take food from outside of myself and put it into my body. These autotrophs are making their food in-house, I guess I should say. And the typical autotroph that we're talking about is a plant. So if we could jump to my screen really quick. This is just a really simple little animated GIF that shows a plant leaf, right? And we can see sunlight is hitting the leaf, and the leaf is breathing in carbon dioxide, and there's also water flowing into the leaf from the stem via the roots. And that ultimately what's being produced here is carbohydrates and oxygen. Plants, or I guess green algae, but this process is sort of the original autotrophic process on the earth. And we can look at this another way. I'll just put it up as a chemical reaction. But what plants do, as I said, was they take carbon dioxide from the air, water from the ground, and they use the energy from the sun. You can see in this chemical reaction diagram, chlorophyll is noted down here. It's the chlorophyll inside of plant cells that's excited, that allows us to use the sun's energy, or that allows plants to use the sun's energy, to combine carbon dioxide and water. And what you end up with as a byproduct is sugar. This is the formula for glucose and oxygen. And so this is really great for a number of reasons. So when we think about life evolving and life establishing itself on the earth, we would think about the idea that the first creatures that had to have existed would have to have been autotrophs, because they would have had to have some way to produce the food that they're eating. Heterotrophs we can only subsist thanks to autotrophs. All of the food that we eat as humans ultimately comes from autotrophs. Even if you're eating, let's say, meat of some kind, maybe you're eating beef, which comes from a cow. The meat on the cow had to come from a plant, from the grass that it ate, and the sugar inside of that grass, the chemical energy inside of that grass, comes from the stored energy that grass stored when it used the sun's energy to combine carbon dioxide and water, again, into sugar. And then the other really fantastic piece here is that because oxygen is produced through the process of photosynthesis, oxygen is required by heterotrophs, by most animals, to burn sugar as we live. So when I eat, I don't know, something like a cookie, let's say, and the molecules of the cookie are broken down into sugar that my body can actually use. The other piece of that puzzle for me being able to use it is I need oxygen to burn the sugar, to break it down. And what heterotrophs do is they run this reaction backwards. Heterotrophs eat sugars and they use oxygen that they've breathed to breathe out carbon dioxide, and then they also get water as a byproduct of that. And so this relationship between photosynthesizing autotrophs and heterotrophs is this key relationship. And again, heterotrophs could only exist thanks to autotrophs. I mentioned earlier that chlorophyll was what makes this possible inside of plants, and I just thought I'd briefly mention, when we look at plant cells contain a special organelle called a chloroplast. Animal cells don't have this. Animal cells have mitochondria, which plant cells have too, you can see over here. Mitochondria is the organelle that's going to allow any organism to burn sugar for energy, but it's only the plant cells that have the chloroplasts. And up close, this is just a diagram, but this is something like what a chloroplast would look like. But there's this chemical chlorophyll that's inside of the thylakoids listed here, these little pancake-looking stacks of green things. And it's the energy of the sun can literally excite the molecules of the chlorophyll to a point that allows the plant to use that energy to do their photosynthesizing process. Just as a final note here, I'll also mention that there's a special class of critters out there called chemoautotrophs. Now they're rare, but we would think of plants as being photoautotrophs, and most autotrophs in the world are photoautotrophs. They use the light from the sun to do this photosynthesizing. but there are rare instances of chemoautotrophs that do not need to be exposed to sunlight. These kinds of things might live, let's say, like deep underground in a cave. And these types of organisms can actually make their own food in-house using energy from chemicals that well up in the ground that they're exposed to. For example, I worked in a cave many years ago where there were chemoautotrophs being studied that subsisted off of hydrogen sulfide gas that was creeping up through cracks in the rock. So just to throw out there that there are other kinds of autotrophs, but most autotrophs are, and the question asked about the most common type, most are photosynthesizing autotrophs. So, felt like a little bit of a whirlwind answer there, but there you go.
All right, so I guess we can jump back to Caitlin for another math question, maybe?
Yeah, we have another math question. It says, what is the value of x solves for the following proportion? Or what value of x solves for the following proportion? 9/6 equals x 8.
Okay. So really quick, I just want to talk about what a proportion is. So when we talk about proportions, kind of think about like percentages, or let's say maybe ratios are very similar to ratios. What if you said something like for every, like in a classroom, for every 2 girls in a classroom, there are 3 boys. And you wanted to know, and the only information that you had was that there are, let's say, 12 boys in the class. And you want to figure out how many girls there are. So one way to think about this is how many groups of kind of 3 boys do you have? You have 4, right? 3 times 4 is 12. So we could multiply the same thing up here and we would have 8. Right? So when we talk about proportions, we're talking about like the same multiplier in a sense. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're saying for every 9 something, let me do like an arrow. For every 9 something, we have 6 something else. So we want to know if I have 8 of that something else, how many of the top something do I have? Hopefully you followed that. I just said something a lot. There are 2 ways to solve this. One that you're probably familiar with is cross-multiplying. So I'm going to do it that way. Before I do, I kind of want you to see how that works and how we kind of do it algebraically, and that cross-multiplying is really just a shortcut that always works whenever I have 2 fractions and 1 variable and they're set up like this. So if I'm solving for x, my first thing that I'm going to look at is what I do every time I solve for equations, and I think, what is happening to x right now? Well, x is being divided by 8. So in order for me to undo that, I'm going to do the opposite, which is multiplying by 8. And then remember, when you have to balance equations, you're going to multiply this other side by 8 as well. And the goal here is really to isolate that variable x. So these 8s are going to cancel out. And I'm left with x equals 9/6 times 8. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and simplify by multiplying. So I'm going to do 8 times 9, which is 72/6. That's x, so x equals 12. So this is kind of the algebraic way of doing it. That shortcut cross-multiplying, you're going to kind of see does the exact same thing. It's just much quicker. And honestly, it's a little easier to remember. So when we cross-multiply, let me get rid of this highlighting over here. Actually, let me just rewrite it, because you're going to kind of see where they start to look similar. 9/6 equals x/8. When we cross-multiply, we're doing all of this that I did originally, but we're just doing it in this kind of algorithm that's a little bit shorter. So I'm multiplying 9 times 8 over here, which you can kind of see, like this multiplication here is happening right here, right? And then on this side of the equation, I'm going to do equals 6 times x. So I'm going to say equals 6x. Now, if I left this alone, and when I say leave this alone, I mean don't simplify this 9 times 8. What you'll see is to solve for x over here, I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. And now you can kind of see where this cross multiplication, this division by 6 is happening right here. So we are doing the same thing as when we're solving it algebraically. The difference is we're kind of found a quicker shortcut way of doing that because these operations all happen at some point anyway, regardless of the order that you do it in. And then you simplify, you get 72 over 6 equals x. So x equals 12. And the reason why I'm showing you this is, one, just to show you that these shortcuts aren't just made up. They do have some algebraic basis to it. And also, if you ever are taking a test and you forget how to cross multiply, or you just kind of panic and don't remember which to multiply by which, then you can always fall back on those general algebraic principles that really do the same thing, just not as quickly or efficiently. So hopefully that helps. Remember cross multiplying when you have those two fractions, and if you forget, just revert back to your basic algebra skills.
Very nice. All right, Caitlin. Science?
Yes, we have another science question. What organ system in your body is your heart in?
Yeah.
Think about that.
So that would be the cardiovascular system, also called the circulatory system. Also, I think sometimes it's called the vascular system. The cardiovascular system is composed of a few different parts. So you've got the heart, obviously, but then you also have all of your veins and arteries, and I'll talk in just a minute about the difference between veins and arteries. But then I thought I'd also mention, included in the circulatory system is the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is another system of sort of tubes, essentially, sort of like your veins and arteries, that transport this fluid called lymph around your body, and so I'll also talk just a little bit about that. But if we could jump to my screen really quick. This is just sort of a simple diagram that shows the pathway of different veins and arteries running throughout a human body. You can see the heart right there in the center. And we tend to think of the heart as a pumping muscle, as a sort of key muscle that helps to pump all of this blood through your circulatory system. And so the question that's sort of begged here is, why do you need blood to run through your system? And there's a few reasons for that. The key number one reason is that the blood is your transporter of oxygen and sugar around your body to your different cells. So you can see in this diagram here, we have blue and red tubes represented. So the red tubes should represent the arteries here, and the blue tubes should represent the veins that we have. And the reason for that is that the red tubes are supposed to represent blood that's being carried out to your body that's oxygenated. Whereas the blue tubes are supposed to represent veins that are carrying blood back to your heart and lungs to be re-oxygenated. And I talked in my last answer, this actually kind of connects really well with the last question I was talking about. I talked about this idea that heterotrophs need oxygen to burn sugar, and that is the reason that we need to breathe oxygen. One of the things I love to bother my students with this question, I will sometimes ask them, do we need to breathe oxygen? And they'll say, yes, obviously we need to breathe oxygen. And I'll ask them why. And they'll just say, because we need oxygen to live. And the question is, why? Like, what does oxygen do for us? Why can't we just subsist without oxygen? Is there any good reason why you have to take this gas through your body? And I think that we don't think about it sometimes, but the reality is, oxygen is this thing that allows carbohydrates in your body to be burned. We talk about it as burning, but allows carbohydrates to essentially be broken down and for the chemical energy held in their bonds to be released. So in any case, I was going to show, I've got it here somewhere, just a diagram of the heart. Briefly, you can see. So again, veins are what carry deoxygenated blood to the heart. You can see here we've got the superior vena cava, which is the largest vein in your body. It's superior in this sense because it's above the heart. Down here we've got the inferior vena cava, not because it's less important, but because it's below. And you can see the flow of blood from both of these areas. They flow into the right atrium. We have flow out to the pulmonary artery from here, then back from the pulmonary artery through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, and then through your aorta. Your aorta is your largest artery in your body. And again, the job of arteries is to carry oxygenated blood to your body, to all the cells in your body for use. I found this really cool little animated GIF. I hope you guys can see that. I can kind of blow it up a little bit here. This describes a faster cycle of blood flow than actually happens. But what this shows is it shows a human here, and you can probably barely see this, but there's a light traveling around his body, which is supposed to represent this blood cell flowing through the entire body. And what you can see here on the left is the carbon dioxide and oxygen level. So let's see, I'll start. Okay, so right now the deoxygenated blood cell is traveling back to the heart and lungs to be reoxygenated. It's full of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the byproduct of burning sugar. At the heart and lungs, the carbon dioxide is released and breathed out. Oxygen is pumped back in, and it's carried away. And you can see this deforming that's happening of the blood cell. That happens both when the blood cell gets to its final destination and when it gets to its when it reaches the lungs. And that's because in both locations, the blood cell has to be squeezed into a very tiny tube called a capillary. So capillaries are veins and arteries. They're the thinnest examples of our veins and arteries. And they're just wide enough to let one blood cell through at a time, or they're like the thickness of one blood cell. So what you see at the ends of each of these is the blood cell being sort of deformed as it's forced through that really tiny capillary. And interestingly, something that you learn in biology is that all the cells in your body contain your DNA, but in fact, your blood cells don't contain your DNA, at least most of them don't. They do when they start out, originally they do. And blood can still be tested for DNA, but the average blood cell does not have DNA inside of it because it's jettisoned the DNA. It's actually taken it and kicked it out along with a lot of other stuff so that it can just focus on its primary job of carrying oxygen around your body. That's really what our red blood cells are for there. So yeah, anyways, a little bit of a long-winded explanation, some extra information there, but the heart is part of the cardiovascular system.
All right. Well, it sounds like it's about that time to go into commercial, and when we come back, we will have our guest from ABC Compost.
That's right.
All right.
All right, so we are back here with Mike Kane from ABC Composting. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And will you tell us a little bit about ABC and what you do there?
Well, I am a worm farmer on the north end of metropolitan area. I started probably about 13 years ago. Wanted to do a business that had a positive effect on the environment. So I take things that people consider negative, like paper waste and food waste, and I compost it through worms to make organic fertilizer.
Oh, that is so cool.
Can I just ask really quick before we get into how that works? ABC, what does that stand for?
It stands for already been chewed composting. So already been chewed is exactly what the worms do. My daughter thought of that.
That's great.
That is really fantastic. What inspired you to do something, or why did you want to do something to help the environment? What was the motivation there?
I just wanted to own a business that I could do by myself and have a positive effect. So to where I was, just like I said, taking trash away, diverting trash from landfills and such, and then having a product that you can sell on the side of it. So.
Yeah, that is so cool. And so what is the product that the worms actually create, and how does this work?
The product is there's actually several. One of them is worm castings, or basically worm poop. What it is, it's organic fertilizer. It has more nutrients in it than any oil-based fertilizer that you can buy. It'll never harm your plants to grow in it. It will never burn. It can be used as a top dressing. It can be used as a root stimulant, as a seed stimulant. It can be dissolved in water, and they make a product called worm tea, which is a liquid fertilizer. It not only fertilizes the plant, but it also inoculates it against any bad germs or bugs on it, because it puts so many healthy vitamins on the plants and leaves. You can put it in the grass, use it for the soil reclamation, because of all the nutrients that are absorbed out of the ground from plants.
Wow.
So
That is really amazing. And so are you growing like a lot of food yourself? Do you use the worm casings, or do you mainly just sell the casings that you produce?
I grow a fair amount of food myself, just standard gardening practices. I don't have, a 100% garden for my yard. I know people that do. I just grow the castings pretty much to sell them. So, places like the Grow House right here in town, which is an indoor vegetable garden, so you can go there and get your vegetables right from them.
Actually, I did an interview out there for this show. And it was such a cool place. And I was actually going to ask, you said you can make worm tea with the casings. Is that something, can you use in like they have an aquaponic system, but if you had a hydroponic system, could you use worm tea? Did you ever hear about casings being used in a hydroponic system?
Yes, you could use it in a hydroponic system. There are a lot of different nutrients that they use in a hydroponic system, along with the worm tea or the worm castings, just to help the plants grow in water. So there's quite a few different nutrients and solutions that they can do.
That is really awesome. Well, we actually have a greenhouse upstairs. So my school is upstairs from the studio, and we have a small greenhouse. And we do have a small hydroponics unit, so that's really awesome to know that we can use worm casings. But we have been discussing the idea of bringing worm composting into the greenhouse. Could you just sort of walk us through, if somebody at home wanted to get started with this, where would they start? What would they need to do? What equipment would they need? How would they go about it?
Sure. Worms actually have very, very minimal requirements. They like moisture. They like darkness, and low vibration.
Okay.
So you want to have a carbon source for their bedding and also their food source. And you also want to have a nitrogen source for their food source, which is your vegetable scraps. There's a couple of things you don't want to do. You don't want any meat or dairy, fats or oils. Okay. That'll make it smell like the rotting dump. And then you don't want to use any acids such as citrus or onion, because then it alters the pH level of the bin. When you would have to monitor the pH level and then correct it using organic solutions. So if you don't feed them the acid, then you don't have to worry about counteracting it.
Gotcha.
So you just avoid the citrus. Worms like neutral, so they like right about 7. It's very, very simple. They also have to have air, so I've used roofing vents in the lid to just drilled holes and put in simple roofing vents in there. You can do the exact same thing by drilling holes in it and drilling holes all around it. So I have a whole bunch of worms in here right now.
Yeah, please, let's
Is it,
bring them out. Stars of the show.
Is it possible to turn this so they can see in the camera kind of what
Sure.
it looks like in here?
Sure, we can
Oh, and
put
there's a
some
pile of.
There's a pile of worms right there.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, you can turn that.
Oh, that
So
makes
we
me
can
so
turn
happy.
it to the camera over here.
Okay.
Look at that.
So all we have is just
A couple worms.
couple of worms. So there's paper.
And we talk us through, you
lettuce.
mentioned you need a carbon source and a nitrogen source. What
Correct.
provides the carbon in there? What provides the nitrogen?
The paper actually provides the carbon. The worms can actually live 100% on paper. You just you just end up with a very small worm and a very poor casting. So this is a worm capsule. Wow. So that's like a worm egg.
Wow. That's amazing.
And it's when they're opaque like that, then they're very new, and the darker they get, the closer they are to hatching. Right. So I just chop up lettuce and all kinds of vegetables, put paper in there so they can survive. As you can see, the worms are crawling away from the light.
Right.
So if you were looking to get your castings out of your worm bin, you would just take the paper off the top and from around the sides, and you would just keep working it, and they just keep going down and in.
Oh, so you're just kind of like
and away
scraping
from
off the top.
just scraping it off the top, and as they
wow.
and as they go down and in, then you have your worm castings, and you could just keep pulling it away from the side. So then you have or your own organic fertilizer.
So since they are breeding in here, do you have to control that at all, or does it kind of cycle itself? Or
They do breed to the size of their aquarium, just like some fish
So they'll
do.
stop.
So they will stop breeding. It is always better to take some out and put them in your yard, put them in your garden, in your flower pots, and that way they're always breeding and always making more, and you have a ready available supply. The beauty of these worms are that they're specially designed for composting. So they like to live in the manure pile or the compost pile. They only live in the top 12 inches of soil. So if they freeze, they die. They breed voraciously. So in a year's time, your population could quadruple for what you have, if not more. And then all they do is eat. So they basically consume half their weight a day. So I always tell people with the worms that I have and the worms that I sell, on an annual basis, I compost probably about 20 tons through my garage annually.
That's amazing. Do you have a sense of the worm population that you've got at your farm?
No.
No,
No idea. No idea.
If it is in the millions of worms?
At times it is.
At times?
At times it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
just
it depends on how many I've harvested, how many I sell and stuff like that.
right.
So.
Well, so how would we actually build a bin if I wanted to build a bin at home? I can just use any kind of a bin like this? Are there any requirements for the worm bin?
Yeah, this looks like just a bin you could pick up at Home Depot or
That's
Walmart.
exactly what it is. This is a Sterilite tote. You could do a Rubbermaid tote. Anything that they will be happy in, you can use. An old refrigerator, an old igloo cooler. Any plastic is generally best. Just because it doesn't absorb the water and it doesn't make it hard for you to maintain the moisture in it, since they do like to be wet or have a moist environment.
And I kind of noticed you mentioned you put the vents in. You said these are roofing vents?
Yeah, I just bought them at Home Depot or Lowe's.
The couple on the sides
Yep,
too to get good ventilation.
Just good airflow. So you want enough moisture that if you were to squeeze your paper together and it just to get a drop of water out of it, and so it doesn't need to be super saturated, it just needs to be moist. The food you feed them is wet food. So if your bin gets oversaturated, just put in dry paper and it'll make the pull the excess moisture out of it. As you can see, if I don't know if we can see the worms here on the table or not, but they're pretty much all have hidden themselves underneath the dirt, retreated. So after they do that, if you just wanted to, you could pull more dirt away from the top and the sides, expose them, and they will just keep working themselves down and in and away from the light and away from the vibration.
Yep.
And then pretty soon you have nothing but worms.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what about the location of your bin? I mean, does it need to be inside, outside? Do I have to be concerned about temperature that the area the worms are?
Yeah, I wonder that too, because we live in, this is a pretty urban area of Denver.
Right.
So if you live in an urban area, is this possible also to kind of piggyback on that?
Absolutely. To answer your question first, yes. 75 is their ideal temperature because they do their best eating, or their most eating, and their most breeding at 75. It gets hotter than that, they get, they slow down, and if they get too cold, then they really slow down. Just like if you go to the bait store and you find red wigglers at the bait shop, they're always in a refrigerator. So that really slows down their metabolism, slows down their eating, and stuff like that. So all of mine are done in the garage. I do have some in the basement. My wife doesn't really appreciate that too much, but there's some down there. In an urban setting, it's ideal to vermicompost because you can do it in a very small container, and you can get rid of all of your junk mail, all your paper waste, toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, stuff like that. All of your pre-consumer food before you put a salad dressing on it. So all your lettuce leaves and all your trimmings from the salad that you're going to eat, and you don't have to throw it away in the trash. So most people, when they throw away it in the trash, they put it in a plastic trash bag and they throw it in the dump, and then it doesn't do anything because it doesn't, the composting that they do at the dump doesn't make it through the plastic bag.
right.
So there's three kinds of composting. There's anaerobic, which is what we do in most of the United States in dumps. Take your garbage, you put it in a big hole, and you pack it down with a big equipment and pack dirt over it
And
let
anaerobic,
it
no
ferment.
oxygen's getting down there,
No
right?
oxygen, that's right. That's why it makes methane gas and it ferments.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
and then there's aerobic oxygen or aerobic composting, which most people do in their backyard with their grass clippings or their yard waste and stuff like that. You can also do the exact same thing where you throw in all your vegetable scraps, your egg shells, the whole 9 yards. In our dry climate, it's a very slow process. You have to really work your compost pile, make sure it stays wet all the time, make sure it stays turned all the time. So what you could throw in it in the fall will last all winter long, and most of it will be there in the spring.
Okay.
It takes roughly about 4 months from what I feed them, brand new newspaper or, I don't know, broccoli stem maybe, to make worm castings, to make it complete, to go all the way through a cycle
Okay.
of what I feed them. Worms like to migrate up, so as you put the new product on the top, they work their way up. Castings are on the bottom, so they're continually rising.
And so this process, like in the bin, this is vermicomposting.
That is vermicomposting, that is correct.
And I just briefly wanted to touch on, we were talking about before the interview started, the idea that this process gives off a lot of heat. Nate, you mentioned that your sister had an issue.
Yeah, I mentioned to you right before the show that my sister, she had a compost pile right by her house. The previous tenants had it there, and apparently the heat from the compost pile started heating up and conducting heat in the walls, the nails, and just, a really good heat conductor inside of there. And literally her house was about to catch on fire, and she noticed it because of the smoke when she left the room and came back in. And they had to cut a hole in her wall, the fire department, to kind of release some of that heat and then cool it down, obviously. So is that...
Well, yeah, so Mike, tell us about what's going on with
Yeah.
composting that could even create that much heat. How
Well,
is that possible?
it does, all composting generates heat, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic. If it's done properly, it doesn't create enough heat to do that. It was probably packed down fairly tight,
Okay.
made wet before it was packed, or new product was put on top of it, and then it was covered and sealed in. So once it was covered and sealed in, and it didn't get any air, and it started to generate heat prior to that, then the heat has nowhere to go, so it just keeps building and building and building.
Wow.
Which would make sense because she didn't know it was there, so it was
Right.
covered. That's why
Before
she
she
didn't notice
even-
it.
oh.
And she never turned it because she didn't
Right.
know it was there.
Didn't
So-
know it was
course.
there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't suggest putting them up against the house, but
Right.
I know people that do. You can get the ones that are the tumblers and turn and stuff like that. Mine sits right next to my garden, so that way after I turn it and I get the compost out of it, I can just add it to my soil in the garden and just keep adding soil to the garden. So
Sounds like a nice process of kind of recycling.
Yeah, definitely a nice cycle. Briefly, we've just got a minute here, Mike. Would you just tell us a few things about the different types of worms that you can use and effectiveness? What type of worm should I be looking for if I'm going to start a vermicomposting bin?
The primary vermicomposting worm is a red wiggler. There's about 6 different varieties of red wigglers. The most popular one is Encina fetida. These are actually Encina hortense. And the only difference between them is the size. So they consider these European night crawlers. They're a little bit bigger. They're about 3 times as the size of a Encina fetida, or what most people will call a red wiggler. Without a PhD in science and a really powerful microscope, you really can't tell the difference between
I'm sure.
one of the 6 kinds of worms. But any one of the composting worms will work. Some people like Alabama jumpers. there are just different worms that can be used. You don't really use the natural worms that you find out in the ground that come out of the ground after it rains. Those are night crawlers, and they like to live in 18 inches of soil.
Oh, okay.
So they don't really want to stay in the worm bin, or if they do, they don't like to live in a mass like this.
Gotcha.
And consume them. So your best bet is to stick with the red wigglers. They're the easiest to handle,
All right.
maintain, and they like to live in a dense population.
Wow, well, so convenient.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm just so excited to get a worm composting bin started in the greenhouse.
All right.
We got to wrap up here. Mike, thank you so much for joining us
my
here. It was
pleasure.
really informative.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
All right,
Not a
guys.
problem.
We're going to wrap up here, and we'll see you back in the Homework Hotline studio in just a minute. All righty, guys. Welcome back. We got time for a question here?
We're actually going to ask the trivia question one more time.
Oh, that
so
sounds
if
like a smart move.
Yeah, have a guess. You can give a call in.
All right, guys, so the trivia question today is, during the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897, what were so valued for the vitamin C content that miners traded them for gold? So if you guys know the answer, go ahead and call on in.
What could it be?
Yeah. Well, while we wait for that, I think we got time for some more questions.
Come
up here.
on. Let's do
A
it.
math one up there?
Yep, we have another math question.
All right.
What is the value, what is the volume of a sphere that has a radius of 3?
All right, so this is really another, really just kind of a formula question. So I'm going to write this out. So remember, a sphere kind of looks like something like this, and it's three-dimensional, right? So this is kind of the way they're typically drawn, with like a little circles inside to give it that effect of 3 dimensions. So we have an equation for the volume of a sphere. So we just put V for volume, and then you can put a little sub-sphere in there to clarify that it's for a sphere. And that is 4/3 pi r cubed. Now you kind of notice that this is kind of similar to area of a circle. We're not going to use it, but I just kind of want you to see the relationship. Area of a circle is pi r squared, and volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. And deriving one from the other is kind of more of a calculus and above thing, but just kind of notice that they both involve the radius, and they both involve pi, right? Because these are both a circular shape. So when we look at volume of a sphere, we're going to talk about I'm sorry, what was the radius again? 3?
3.
I think it was 3.
It was
okay.
3.
So we're kind of doing the same thing where we're looking for the radius, and that's really, if you notice, this is a kind of a complex looking equation, but the only variable we really care about is the radius. So what you'll notice with the sphere, because it's perfectly round like a basketball or a golf ball or something like that, the radius is the same all the way around. The difference between like that and a circle is it goes every direction, right? Totally 3 dimensions. So I could literally draw a radius of 3 from the center of the sphere to anywhere on it, really. So that would be 3, just like a circle. So when we look at volume of a sphere, we're really just plugging this in. So volume of a sphere equals 4/3 times pi times 3 cubed. Again, this kind of goes back to, do you want to punch this in the calculator or do you want to simplify it? And just remember, I say this a lot, but every time you punch something in the calculator and it's got a number like pi in it or a fraction, and you end up rounding, your number is getting less and less precise each time you round. So I'm going to show you really quick the most precise way to do it, which is just really to simplify this as far as you can go. So I'm going to rewrite this as volume equals 4/3 times, and I'm going to take out this 3 cubed, and I'm going to say it's 27 pi. And then we just simplify our fractions here. So I'll simplify this. I'll kind of add this in a different color. Divided by 1. We can go through and simplify this as, look, this is a 3, and this 27 is divisible by 3. So this really kind of becomes 9, right? 27 divided by 3 is 9. And I'm left with no denominators. Well, denominators of 1. So I end up with a volume of 36 pi. And again, if this were inches, I would say inches cubed. I don't know if we had the unit. But this comes up a lot in application problems, so think again about if somebody were to ask you this in real life, not math class life, how would you answer it? And again, you wouldn't say 36 pi. You would say probably, oh, not that, 36 times pi. You would say approximately 113.1. Again, just plugging that in your calculator. And if, all right, so we're going to round this to 113.1 inches cubed, and in case you're not familiar, this symbol here, it looks like an equal sign. It means approximately, so whoever's reading your answer will know that you did round somewhere. All right, I hear that we have a caller on the line that we may or may not know to answer the trivia question. He or she may be taking advantage.
Let's see if she can do it.
Hello?
Hello.
Wow.
Oh, hey there.
Hello.
I have an answer to the trivia question.
Do you?
Do you? Interesting.
You trying to win some symphony tickets there, Becca?
Yeah. Duh.
Wait, is this
I miss you
why
guys too much, though.
you weren't at work today, just so you can get these
Just for
tickets?
this moment?
Yes, I've been waiting for this all year.
Yeah. Well, you better get this right then, because that is going to be a huge letdown if you don't.
I think I know.
Do you need us to read the question to you again, Becca?
Sure, read it one more
Okay.
time.
During the Klondike Gold Rush in 1897, what were so highly valued for their vitamin C content that miners traded them for gold?
Are they potatoes?
It is potatoes.
It is potatoes.
Well done, Becca.
Congratulations.
Amazing. We need like confetti to fall from the ceiling. And
Yeah.
Just like horns
Celebration
to go
music.
off. Yeah.
I think you have a couple options. You can either stay on the line and our director, Nancy, can get your contact information and send those tickets to you, or I guess she can just give them.
We can just talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I could just see you guys
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Oh.
See
All
how
right.
easy it is to do this? You guys
Okay.
call in and win. Jeez, that was so easy.
Yeah, this could be you.
Right.
All right, Becca.
It
Well,
was me.
good to hear from you. Nice job. We got to wrap up the show, so take care.
All righty.
Thanks for calling.
You guys have fun. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right. All right, so we just got a second here.
Let's talk a
Caitlin.
little bit.
Talk to us about potatoes. What do you know about
All right,
potatoes?
so miners did not know specifically about vitamin C. It wasn't discovered until the 1930s. However, miners did know the potatoes prevented and treated scurvy, a disease caused by the lack of vitamin C. Scurvy was a problem for Klondike miners. It was a cause of death if left untreated. So that's a grand thing to know.
From what I understand, then vitamin C is important.
Vitamin C is important. Potatoes, great
potatoes.
source of it. Potatoes, great source of potassium.
Yeah.
But in our modern world, you're typically getting enough of that stuff anyways. You know, the issue with potatoes as being your only food source now is that they're so high, it's just carbohydrates.
Right.
And you should be getting healthy fats. They do have a lot of great amino acids, not fully complete protein, but there you go. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us here at Homework Hotline today. We will be back tomorrow with a science demo and Becca.
Yep.
Yeah, so call in your homework questions.
We will see you tomorrow.
We will see you tomorrow. Take